I'm here to talk to you about the state of elections, democracy, and voting around the world. And as I was thinking and reflecting on this, it occurred to me, or I couldn't get out of my head, the idea of the State of the Union speech. So this is the speech the president gives every year to a packed Congress, a full House. Millions of people inside and outside the country watch this. But at the end of the day, what really everybody's waiting for in that State of the Union speech is when the president declares, the state of our union is strong. And that's right. And there's a certain level of comfort when that happens. You know it's going to be okay, right? He says it's going to be okay. And I often think the people that watch that State of the Union speech, they probably get to that point, and then they say, all right, well, we're going to have to watch the rest. We're good, right? He said the State of the Union is strong. Let's go play Fortnite or something else. Because we know it's going to be okay. Now, I wish I could stand before you today and say the state of democracy around the world is strong. But I can't. It's not strong. Democracy is in peril. Democracy is under attack. It's been a rough decade for democracy, for young democracies and for old democracies. Young democracies, 10 or 15 years ago, that we thought were promising, exciting, full of hope, are backsliding. Think of Turkey, Poland, Hungary, the Philippines, Venezuela. We'll talk about Brazil in a little bit, are backsliding. Established democracies are also struggling with democracy. They're having populist candidates rise through their ranks. You're seeing concerns over voting elections, who can vote, who can't vote. And there's a loss of support in those democracies. Non-democratic forces aren't missing this opportunity. They are attacking and trying to undermine democracy globally. So think about Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and a whole bunch of other anti-democracies are not just constraining their own public, they're going outside their own borders to try to undermine undermine democracy and democratic development. The forces of anti-democratization are on the march. And that's not how the story was supposed to end. That's not how the democracy story was supposed to end. It was, for a long time, while democracy is a struggle, we felt like the trend lines were going in the right direction. Over time, political scientists looked at this and said, more time, more economic development. What we're going to see is more democracy. We'll see the number of democracies increase, and we'll see the strength of those democracies increase. And there was a lot of hope within political science. This is the total number of democracies. That line will just keep going up and up and up. And over the last 10 to 12 years, it's gone down. So Freedom House is the most well-known organization monitoring and cataloging democracy around the world. And over the last 12 years, there's been a net decline in democracy around the world. In that 12-year period, you've seen 113 countries have a democratic decline, and only 62 countries have democratic improvement. And you can see this on the slide. The red is democratic decline, the blue is democratic improvements. There's a lot of red up there. We can look at the United States and their own measure on Freedom House, and you can see the United States democracy is trending the wrong way. You don't want lines going down. And I know what you're thinking. This is Donald Trump. Donald Trump did this. This is all Donald Trump. That's not so easy to say that. Well, certainly Donald Trump hasn't turned this around. Democracy was declining well before Trump took office. This is a systematic problem that's been at play for years. And so you know what that means. We have to say, thanks, Obama, right? And it's not just Freedom House. There are other measures of democracy. The Economist does a measure of democracy. And in 2016, they came out and they had their top category is a full democracy. And in 2016, the United States fell out of that category and dropped to the next category, which is a flawed democracy. And these trends should concern us. They should ask us to think what is going on both in the United States and what's going on globally. If we think about turnout, voter turnout, you say, oh, this is something we Americans know well, right? We love having lots and lots of elections, and we love to not show up for those elections, right? So we have them, we're not there, except for old white people. Other than that, most people don't vote in this country. Well, this is something that's familiar around the world. So this shows global voter turnout in legislative elections. And what we see is starting in the 90s, it's trending the wrong way. Voter turnout is across the world heading down. This includes young democracies and established democracies. Again, a systematic decline. Maybe the most disturbing element about global democracy is the degree to which the public in the United States and around the world is losing faith in its own democracy. A poll in October of 2016 found that 46% of Americans reported they never had or lost faith in the U.S. democracy. 46%. That's a high, high number. And I would suggest that there's a generational effect here, because when you look at older versus younger generations, you see a dramatic shift. So this is from the World Values Survey. So in 2005 to 2014, the World Values Survey went out and they interviewed people all over the world and asked them questions. And on this question, they asked people, how important is it that you live in a democracy? And so they asked different generations. So they asked people who were born in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, how important is this? And what we see is that for older generations, it matters a lot. I know this is a little confusing. Look at the green line. There's your grandparents. There's your parents. There's me. And there you are. And so to simplify this, if you went out, when they went out and they asked your grandparents, how important is it that you live in a democracy? Upper 80s to 90% of them said, this is very, very important. Democracy, living in a democracy is deeply important to us. Your parents, they're pretty enthusiastic about democracy, but a little less than your grandparents. Me and my generation, Generation X, we're even a little less enthusiastic. But what's really concerning is when you jump down to millennials, 57%. So what they're saying here is that, democracy, living in a democracy, isn't all that important to me. Should give us some pause to think about what's going on here. There's also a generational effect when we start looking at the percentage of people that will support a strong authoritarian leader. So here's some more World Values Survey data. This is also confusing, but it's looking at generations and the degree to which people support strong leaders, not parliament and elections. So they would ask people, would you rather have a strong leader or parliament and elections? And what we see, again, if you look at older generations versus younger generations, you see an increasing support of strong leaders. Look at this 2011 data point. Nearly 50% of millennials expressed approval for a strong leader, not parliamentary elections. That's stunning. When you think about 50% of the millennials that were across the world, and this is not just in the United States, said they would support a strong leader and are not that concerned about a democracy. This should really trouble us. But on some level, it's not all that surprising. And I don't think we should blame millennials or blame young people, because when you look around democracy, it doesn't seem that great these days, right? If you could pull up our founding fathers and ask them to look at democracy today, I don't think they'd be that proud, right? No, Madison would not have loved you. Absolutely not. The founding fathers, I don't think the founding fathers would be happy with the presidency. I don't think they'd be happy with what's going on in Congress. And I also don't think they'd be happy with what's happened recently in the Supreme Court. So no matter where you fall on the Brett Kavanaugh debate, it's hard to argue that our democracy was in a better place after that process. I think we felt pulled apart. I think we lost faith in our democracy. This was a bad thing. So what the global data about democracy tells us is that across the board, people are less participatory in their democracy. They're not voting as much as they used to. They also have lost faith in their democracy. They don't think their institutions are as valuable, and democracy is not as important as it once was. And finally, young people in particular are more prone to support strong leaders as opposed to democratic institutions. And we can see this in real time if we jump down and talk about the Brazilian presidential election. Now, I would put you that the Brazil presidential election might be the most exciting presidential, most bizarre and strange presidential election I've seen in a long, long time. I thought France was crazy. Brazil's got them topped. All right, let's walk through this quickly. So early on, the leading candidate was Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Lula, right? Lula had served 2 terms previously in the early 2000s. Everyone loved Lula. Brazilians loved Lula. The international community loved Lula. Lula was a star. The only problem? Lula was also criminal, right? He was found guilty of corruption. Now, he says he was innocent, but nevertheless, a court found him guilty. Lula is now serving 12 years in jail. When they put Lula in jail, he was still running for president. And when they polled him, he was still leading in the polls. So then this came to the Brazilian judicial system to decide, and they said, you can't run for president. You can't do this. You can't be president and be in jail. It's too confusing. So Lula was removed from the presidential election. The next candidate that emerged and really came on the scene was Jair Bolsonaro. You've probably heard a bit about him. He's a long-standing member of Congress, right-wing politician, but for 15 or 20 years, he's basically been on the margins. Not that influential, not that important, until now. Suddenly, he has a tremendous following. That picture on the left is him in the yellow shirt. He has a lot of support among young people. They're carrying him on the shoulders. And the reason I selected this picture, it was taken right before he was stabbed. Yes, he was stabbed. And he lived, so it's okay. Here's a picture from the hospital. He loves finger guns, lots of finger guns. All right, so he lived, and he's still running for president. He's not going to let a little stabbing dampen his presidential ambitions. But, all right, so the reason I tell you about this before I get into his policies, is I hope you feel a little sorry for him. Because once I start telling you about his positions, you are not going to feel sorry for him at all. I think it's fair to say he's a pretty terrible person. Let's get into the specifics. All right, so he has been open about supporting the military dictatorship that was in Brazil for 20 years from the 60s to the mid-1980s, and has said that that dictatorship was a good thing. And the only mistake that military dictatorship made is they didn't kill enough people. He says this publicly. And the number he throws out there is, it probably would take another 30,000 killings to really put things in order. Wow. He's been a vocal critic of democracy. So he said publicly, you won't change anything in this country through voting. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And then went on to talk about if a few innocent people die, that's all right. He is pro-torture. I am pro-torture, and the people are too. When asked about every minority group in Brazil he has attacked and denigrated, when asked to describe one particular black group that has ancestral roots back in Africa, was brought over in the slave trade, he said, they don't do anything. I don't think they're even good for procreation anymore. I mean, just awful things. You say, what are his views on gays? I'd rather have my son die in a car accident than have him show up dating some guy. What are his views on women? I had 4 sons, but then I had a moment of weakness, and the 5th was a girl. Yes, this is stunning. Arguably, the most offensive thing he said was to a fellow member congresswoman, in which he said to her, I'm not going to rape you because you're very ugly. Stunning, right? This list goes on and on. I could do this for a long time, talking about all the offensive and hateful things that he has said. But what's truly amazing about all of this is that in the first round of Brazil's presidential election, he won 46% of the vote. So you have to win 50 to become president. So it moves on to a second round. He is the leading candidate, and most likely will be Brazil's next president. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that reality, that somebody who talks this way is going to be elected president. So then you say, how does this happen? Well, how it happens is people lose faith in their democracy. And as that process occurs, people are attracted to strongman leaders. And what he's suggesting is, I will reestablish order. I will make things safe for you again. And suddenly, people are willing to compromise democracy for their own security. All right, so you say, Muck, this is very, very disturbing. What should I take away from this talk? There's a couple lessons. One is that it's time to be active, right? So what does that mean? It's a time to lead some change. First, go out and vote, right? In the midterms, vote. Absolutely, that's the first thing you should do. But at a deeper level, you need to fight for your democracy. So voting is a good first step. But fighting for the democracy needs to be more sustained. And I'm not talking about literally fighting for democracy, like intellectually, politically, socially, become active and an advocate for your democracy. We haven't had to fight for our democracy in a long time. Most of us never really have. And you think about the moments in time when we have fought for our democracy, there's always been a good enemy. Hitler, Stalin, the Soviet Union, King George, right? There's always somebody who can say, we're fighting against that guy. We don't have that anymore. When you think about the enemy now, the enemy is usually somebody within a democracy. We are turning against each other when we should be fighting for our democracy. So what that means is I think we need to take our democracy and make it more important than our party, than our partisanship. What we often do is we flip that. We make our partisanship more important than our democracy. And then when we do that, it's easy to chip away at the democratic rules. I think we need to flip that and make our democracy matter. The other thing, we have to be careful not to wait for a savior to come in. Some wonderful, thoughtful, creative politician who's, charming and delightful and come in and sweep us all off our feet and save the day. Right? I know most of us want us to do, we want a Justin Trudeau, an American Justin Trudeau to come in and say, it's going to be all right. He's so dreamy and so smart and all of that, right? And so there's a tendency to say somebody else is going to come in and save our democracy. I would argue to fight against that impulse. It really is a call to action to all of us now to fight for our democracy. If we wait for Justin to come, it may not happen. So I would suggest to you in terms of advice, go vote. That's important. But after the vote, fight for your democracy and fight in a sustained way. It really matters. Thank you.